This is my channel's weekly compendium for the week ending Monday, August 21st, 2023. Case file number 1246, written by Twisted and Loved, chased by an unseen nightmare in a fjord of Norway. I used to live on a rather remote farm in the middle of Norway. My home is located at the end of a fjord that will take you out to sea, and after a while to civilization in the big city. You can also drive into town in about 4.5 hours from my home, but this is more or less just to give you an idea of the sense of scale. I have 2 neighbors about 40 minutes away from my home, but they are seldom at home, so I'm for the most part alone with my dogs and farm animals, sheep mostly, and a few pigs. Around my home, there are deep woods, and looming above are tall mountains and deep valleys, overgrown by thick forest and heather meadows. I hunt these lands in the hunting seasons, but there are places I do not go due to them being remote, hard to get to and such. But I have found myself pressed for income as the pandemic prevented me from having hunters come here to hunt deer, grouse, and moose. Now, this is relevant to my experience, due to my reliance on these guests for keeping my finances in order. So, faced with the prospect of having to send all my livestock to the slaughter and generally accepting my inability to keep the family farm afloat, I find myself in a precarious position. I had, since my rather unpleasant experience in the woods as a 16-year-old hunter and the following, vowed to myself that I would never hunt that stretch of the woods that belongs to the property that I now own. Having grown a lot older and far more calloused when it comes to things considered odd or supernatural. So I got an extended quota for deer and roe deer, and having gotten this, I decided to use the profits made from selling the game to a local who sells to hotels and fancy restaurants in town. So in the last week of the deer and roe deer season, before Christmas, I found myself deep into the high valley, amongst the heather meadows and sparse pine woods. I had left my pickup on the gravel road that ran along the fjord, and hiked up the valley side with my hunting dog and rifle in hand, looking for red deer. I had been on the move for about 3 hours when the weather changed. A thick fog rolled in and blanketed the terrain. I stopped and looked around while I got my compass out. That was when the first odd thing happened. My dog stopped dead in his tracks and began shivering, as if cold, or what came to my mind shortly after, that he was nervous. His tail was tucked between his legs, and the shivering got more intense. Then, with a yelp that can only be described as one of sheer terror, he bolted down the steep valley side. I yelled and whistled in an attempt to stop him before he hurt himself. There are bears, wolves, and lynx around where I live, and the addition of the odd invasive wild boar made me more than a bit worried. Raising my rifle, a Springfield 30.06, slightly, I looked around in an attempt to see what had caused my dog to panic and flee. I called out to scare away any nearby animals or make any other hunters realize I was nearby. But the chance of any other hunters being on my lands are slim and none, since I do not sell many licenses for red deer or roe deer. I got no response, and only the utter silence of the woods and meadows filled my ears. It was then that the sounds of labored breathing and something resembling the odor of pinewood resin mixed with wet fur that was very filthy. Anyone who has worked with sheep who graze outside and has had the unpleasant job of handling said animals will know how wet, filthy, and unkept wool will reek. At this moment, I felt a long-suppressed feeling of silent dread begin to creep into my bones. I started to back down the valley side, keeping a keen eye on the ground so as to not stumble, but also to look for any signs of whatever was lurking nearby. I hoped it was just my mind distorting the common sounds and smells of the woodland. Having put some 500 meters behind me, the sounds and smells still hung around. At that moment, I decided that I needed to warn whatever this thing was. I raised my rifle and in rapid succession, fired 4 shots into the air, as such not to wound any unlucky critter. In my most nightmarish dreams, I could never have imagined the response I got. A deep, guttural howl, followed by what can only be explained as something of great height and weight making its rage known. A stone the size of a rucksack came hurtling down, about 10 feet above my head, and landed with a great crash far down below. I am not ashamed to admit that at this moment, I soiled myself as I ran like a whipped hare down the steep valley side. I dropped my backpack and binoculars somewhere in that valley side. The only thing I kept a firm hold of was my rifle, A primal instinct in me told me I needed something to defend myself with, although what chased after me, screaming in primal rage, would not have been fazed by my gun. Hell, I doubt anything short of several .338 Winchester mag rounds to the body would have done anything short of annoy it. I burst out of the woods along the gravel road and ran until I could taste the mixture of blood and bile in my mouth. Upon reaching my car, I vomited all over my boots and felt like my heart was about to explode from fear, looking around to see if my pursuer was still after me or lurking around. But no stench of wet wool hung in the air, well, except my soiled pants. I shouted for my dog for what seemed like an eternity until my nerves caused me to climb into my car, drive as fast as I dared along the gravel road until I saw my home. Climbing out of my car and walking on legs that felt like they were made of gelatin. My heart nearly stopped when I saw my dog. He was a mess, muddy, his fur thick with twigs and heather, his eyes wide with exhaustion. I fumbled with my keys and unlocked the door and let myself and my dog in. In the hours that came, I showered, cleaned myself up, and took care of my dog. But my mind and body were ravaged with fear. Every sound I heard made me almost jump. I did not sleep that night, and when my significant other came home, she commented on how worn out I looked and how equally strung out my dog was. This took place some weeks ago. Last week I was out with the garbage when the smell of wet wool and pinewood resin filled my nostrils. Now I am lost for what to do. I will be damned if I end my days in the woods, but who knows? Time will tell. Case file number 1247, written by Egoplasm. The 5-hour drive to nowhere. So I used to be in a punk rock band, and we used to drive out to our drummer's house to practice. Our drummer lived in this secluded old house that was placed way off the main road by several country roads and a long as hell gravel driveway that led back into a heavy wooded area. We had all met up, had a good practice, hung out, how all that stuff happens. After, I'd packed up my stuff and left. However, I was driving back down that long gravel driveway. I noticed it felt a lot longer than usual, and I was driving on it for a long while. I drove on a straight gravel road for about 5 hours if my car's clock could be trusted. I even stopped a few times along the way to get out and look around or to try to call my friends to see if someone could come find me. None of my calls went through, apparently. The road stretched perfectly straight for hours and was flanked on both sides by empty cornfields. I couldn't see lights from local farmhouses or the nearby town that I lived in, which was weird because you could almost always see the light pollution from that town at night. Just perfect black on a road I didn't know. After a solid 5 hours of driving and feeling exhausted, I blinked and found myself sitting in my own home's driveway, car idling, and only 30 minutes had passed as it was only still about 1 a.m. To this day, I have no idea what happened, and I even still joke about it to my old bandmates that they should expect a phone call in the middle of the night from a much younger me. Case file number 1248, written by Children of the Night. The Remarkable Journey of Hudson. One night, I dreamt 2 people were handing me a black dog. They said to me, "This is your dog, and your dog's name is Hudson." I held up my hands as if to ward them off and replied, "No, I already have a dog," which I did. 1 month later, there was a terrible wildfire which destroyed many homes. The day after the fire, a couple I knew, animal rights activists, showed up on my doorstep. They had a small young black dog with them. They didn't tell me her name. She had lost her home in the fire. They begged me to foster her for a few days, telling me they would soon find her a new home. I took one look at her and said, "No, that's okay, I'll keep her." I named her Hudson, and she was the most amazing dog ever, the best dog in the multiverse. All the dogs I have owned before or since could not compare to her. Super smart, super devoted, there was nothing she couldn't learn. I love that dog so very much. She has been gone for years now, but I think about her every single day. Bonus file written by Emilius Brown, the Unsettling Californian Giant. I was 17 years old and lived in a very small rural community in central California. It was late spring 1996. My best friend and I were bored and decided to take a drive, something we did frequently. Bear in mind that where I lived, I was basically surrounded on one side by mountains and the other by over 80 miles of flat, sandy valley. Anyway, it was about 11 p.m. and we had been driving out towards the valley on a dirt road for about an hour. Descending down into the valley from the hills, I spot a glimmer of reddish-orange light. We of course drive another 20 minutes towards the glimmer and come upon it. Coals. The glimmer was embers or coals of a fire. Where we were, there was nothing, and I mean nothing. No bushes, no trees, no hills, nothing. Not for at least 10 miles in either direction. Flat. We shined a handheld spotlight all around and didn't see anybody or anything. We decided the proper thing to do was turn the truck around and throw dirt on the embers by spinning the truck tires. As my friend backed up the truck, I looked out and rolled down my window, and not 5 feet from me was the largest man I've ever seen. Black, shirtless, bald, wearing only denim shorts, at least 6'5", 300 pounds, and staring right at me. I yelled, "Drive, drive, drive!" And without even looking, my buddy tears out of there. When I catch my breath, I explain what I saw. He's still driving 50, 60 miles per hour on a dirt back road toward town, which at that speed, we could reach town in about 30 minutes. Of course, my buddy never saw anybody, and he and I both think I'm losing my mind. Remember, there was nothing out there besides the coals. No car, no motorcycle, nothing. No way for anyone to be out there other than by foot. I should also mention that heading back into town, there were any number of dirt roads back in, and I'm talking hundreds. Trails, roads, hills, hell. We were in a 4x4, we could have made our own road if we wanted to. We ended up coming down a rarely used dirt road, and on the last curve before pavement, just outside town, the same man steps out from behind a tree, looks at us, and shakes his finger and head at us as if he was scolding a child. We both saw him this time, and when we looked back, he was gone. This is the only story in my life I have no explanation for. First, there is no possible way this person could have known which way we'd go back into town, especially with enough time to hide and then wait for us to come. Second, and I know I already said it, but there was no vehicle out in the flats. There just wasn't. To this day, I get the creeps just thinking about it. Case file number 1249, written by Donacia, my daughter's time-defying double. So this past weekend I was doing laundry. My washer works fine, but I have to go to the laundromat to dry the loads because my dryer went out. Well, our washer is stored in the basement. The basement door is clearly seen from the spot that I sit at in the living room. The couch that I sit on is also on the wall connecting to the back sliding patio door and the back window on the door to the left of the couch and the window to the right. My kids were all playing outside, running in and out. On a trip for my middle daughter, I asked her to go downstairs and get the laundry that I put in the washer. She went to the bathroom that is directly across from the basement. Then, when she finished, I saw the basement door open. However, I also saw her run past me and go out the back door. And by the window being on the other side of me, I heard her voice yelling at kids in the backyard. I was playing my game on my phone, but I did see and hear her. I have 3 girls, but they all look different in heights and looks, and I know the difference in their voices as well. After noting that she deliberately disobeyed me, I was a bit irritated, so after my round of the game, I was going to call her to come back inside, but I no longer heard her voice. As soon as I put the phone down to get up and get her, I see the basement door open. It was her. My middle child asked me to go get the clothes, the one I clearly saw and heard go out the back door that was right next to me. She had a bag of clothes and was looking at me like why I was looking at her so strangely. I explained what I saw and she just laughed at me. There was not enough time for her to go out the back door, swing around to the front even if she was running. Not to mention then come through the front door and go into the basement, get the clothes and come back upstairs all without me noticing. I would have heard her coming through the front door if that was even a possibility, but it just wasn't enough time. I was freaked out so bad that I pulled up my blanket over my head, turned on Glitch in the Matrix videos on YouTube, and took a nap. Bonus file written by PutisMan173, Shadows and UFOs of the Past. One day, I am essentially home alone except for my mom, who is outside in the garden. I was in the kitchen washing my hands when I felt like something was watching me, so I turn around and in the kitchen doorway, there's this kind of shadow peeking around the corner, and then it quickly goes behind the corner again. I go over to the doorway and look in the corner where it disappeared. Nothing. It just vanished. After looking back on my house's history, it turns out that it's actually fairly old, built in the 1930s, and that one of the former owners had died in the house. Not saying it was them, but it still spooks me to this day. My home has a lot of weird crap going on in and around it too. For starters, my mom and I keep hearing strange whistling coming from the woods on our property. We also keep seeing these weird red things on our CCTV. Not the ones you are thinking of. They aren't the fast, blurry ones that are most likely bugs. These ones are slow, and they almost dance in the air. Sometimes there's even 2 or 3 of them at once, and you can actually see the whole shape. So definitely not a bug causing motion blur. Definitely not a camera glitch either, because they appear on multiple different cameras. There's also been a number of UFO sightings around my house by both my mom, myself, and on one occasion, we both saw them at the same time. Bonus file written by Anonymous, The Dark Secrets of the Mustang Pen. For 6 months, I've been working on rehabilitating a Mustang. Someone abandoned her at the barn where I work my show horse. I didn't tell anyone. Poor baby starved for a week before I found her in the back pen. The barn owners were going to shoot her because she was totally wild and had attacked a few people, but she seemed to tolerate my presence, so I said give me 6 months. After 6 months, I had just gotten her to accept having her face touched and being led around a little by Halter. This was huge. I went to get a drink, came back, and she'd strangled herself. I was devastated, but here's the unexplainable thing. I thought she hated birds because once every couple of weeks I'd find dead crows in her pen, but I also found a dead kitten once. Okay, horses will kill small animals sometimes. But one of the cows in the adjacent pen gave birth to a dead calf. Another one was crazy. Horses who get along together would start attacking each other when placed in the adjacent round pen. My mild show horse would just run and run and run until she was exhausted in there. And yesterday, I went back to the Mustang's old pen to ensure everything was all cleaned up, no standing water or anything. And there were dead crows everywhere. They'd broken their necks. They'd gotten stuck in the Latila fence. They'd drowned themselves in the water tank. There were dead snakes and toads and tarantulas. And the cow who is crazy got moved to a different pen, where she has stopped screaming. Something is wrong with that patch of ground. Could be an underground cave in sandstone giving off some weird subterranean sound. We are demolishing the entire area and not putting any more animals back there. I have since talked to some old-time ranchers in the area. Apparently there are several spots where animals cannot be housed or they will fight, panic, even kill themselves. I still think it's subterranean caves in the sandstone, but this area is also the center of a triangle formed by 3 nearby massacre sites. Case file number 1250, written by Starry Tacos. How a Blister Saved My Life. I was walking to work one morning, along a route I'd taken for a couple years by then. Bright, sunny day. It was a little over a mile, and I tended to walk quickly, so it usually took me not quite half an hour. I'd bought a new pair of shoes a couple days before, but this was the first day I wore them. About halfway along, I started to notice some chafing on one of my heels. I knew what it was, a blister developing, but figured I'd put on a band-aid when I got to work and kept walking. The chafing got worse, and I stopped a couple times to see if I could adjust the fit of the shoe, or if maybe retying it would help. I ended up just walking slower than usual, and was 2 blocks away from my work, about 5 to 10 minutes later than I would have been if I'd been walking at my normal pace. I reached the last block, and ahead of me, the entire wall of a brick building collapsed out onto the sidewalk and out onto the street, crushing a car parked at the curb. A crew had been working in the building for a week or so, gutting the interior, and they accidentally knocked out the entire exterior wall. If it weren't for my new shoes and the blister they caused, I'd likely have been under the wall when it collapsed, and I would not be writing this. Case file number 1251, written by Just a Wet Potato, My Father's Final Gift. My dad had undiagnosed heart issues. The last night I saw him alive, I was dropping him off to his semi-truck so he could start his 4 weeks of driving before coming back home. He gave me this letter and money, told me to open the letter when I got home, but the money was so I could buy things for my brother while he was gone, because he would be over at my house a lot. My brother was 12 at the time, and my parents were going through a divorce. Looking back, the whole night was strange. It was a mostly clear winter evening with no prediction for a snowstorm, but on the way to the city we were going to, it let loose, massive blizzard. We had to stop at a Denny's and decided to have breakfast at midnight. We talked for hours over coffee, food, and cigarettes. I quit shortly after he died. When the storm cleared up and it looked like the roads were good again, we left. At his truck, we loaded his things up and he said he would call me in a few weeks. He didn't have a cell phone, and at the time neither did I, only a house phone. Then he said he would see me later, and I had this feeling come over me that I would never see him again. He was giving me a hug and I squeezed him a little tighter and said I don't think I was ever going to see him again. He pushed me back, gave me a little smile, and then pulled me in tighter before saying he loved me and sent me on my way. I left in tears. When I got home, I read the letter and it basically told me how proud he is of me, told me to take care of my brother, and he loves me very much. Tears again. Several weeks later on, the night he died, I couldn't sleep at all. I was anxious and my chest was tight. There was another huge snowstorm and I stayed up playing games on my computer and watching The 10th Kingdom. At about 2 in the morning, I decided to lay on the couch and put on music to see if I could fall asleep. Shortly after, I had the most pain I've ever felt in my chest. It took my breath away and made me sick. The moment the pain stopped, the song Daughters by John Mayer started playing. Up until that point, I'd never heard the song. I fell asleep right after. My husband woke me up at about 8 a.m. and took me to bed, and I kept telling him my dad's dead. My dad died. He thought I was dreaming. Around noon, my husband came back into the room and told me I needed to wake up, and I told him again my dad is dead. He then told me my aunts and uncle were in the living room. I walked out and told them my dad was dead, which is what they were there to tell me. My aunt was upset because she thought I had gotten a call and chose not to tell them. I had to show them my caller ID history to prove that I haven't gotten a call. My dad died of a ST segment elevation myocardial infarction, STEMI, or widowmaker heart attack, at 2:23 that morning. Case file number 1252, written by Anonymous, the time traveler in a 1940s suit. Back in the 90s, I was in New York City for an engagement party. The venue was a non-smoking event, which kind of started sporadically back then, not as common as it is now. I went outside for a smoke and noticed this gentleman standing outside in a very outdated suit, carrying an even more outdated suitcase. I would say his attire was mid-1940s. We started talking, and he told me he was down on his luck and was homeless for quite some time. I asked him if he needed money, and he was more than happy to accept. I handed him a 20, and he was very gracious. A few friends popped out a minute later. No more than a second went by as I turned around to greet my friends, only to look back at the gentleman, and he was gone, with a $20 bill on the sidewalk on the ground where he was standing. There was literally no place for him to have ducked into to hide. I picked up the $20 and just shook my head. My friends told me how lucky I was to find the 20, when one friend started to tell them that I didn't find the 20. He was watching from inside the restaurant and told my friends that I gave the money to a guy I was talking to. However, when he was about to go out with the rest of the group, he was surprised to see that the man had left. I told them what just happened, and they started to look around for the man. After about 2 minutes, they gave up. Case file number 1253, written by 30% Crunchy. My mind was mystified on the beach. When I was 9 or maybe 10 years old, we went on a beach vacation with our extended family. This was right at the start of the trip, and I was playing in the waves with my glasses on, and of course, a big wave crashed down on me and my glasses were gone. I was absolutely devastated, both because I was afraid my parents would be furious. I wasn't supposed to be playing in the water with my glasses on unless I wore this big ugly floatable glasses strap that I hated, but also because I have awful vision and I'm essentially blind without my glasses. I made my way back to my parents and told them what happened. We were vacationing on an island that was pretty rustic, no commercial stores on the island, and the mainland was several hours away by ferry. My poor mom spent the rest of her day attempting to make calls to my eye doctor to try to get a new pair of glasses somehow made and sent somewhere relatively close to us, which would still take the better part of a week and be pretty expensive to do. This was the 90s, and we weren't able to easily order a new pair like we might be able to do so today. I had just about accepted the fact that I'd have to spend the rest of our trip more or less blind, when the next day at the beach, my uncle, who was surfing, reached down into the knee-deep water and pulled my glasses out of the sand. None of us could believe it. This beach is known for its rough tides, and we weren't even sure we were on the same part of the beach as we were the day before. My uncle absolutely saved me from spending the whole trip completely unable to see. Still to this day, the craziest and luckiest thing that has ever happened to me. Creepy File number 110, written by Mulberry Strange. The spine-chilling silence of the deep woods. When I was young, 9, give or take a year or two, I habitually spent time walking the railroads to get to the woods behind our property. I loved spending time there and knew the area very well. On one particular evening, though, that changed. I had been wandering around gathering random things to bring back to my fort. A larger tree with railroad spikes for climbing that I had found, and I realized it was getting dark fast. I had stayed out too late and now risked the wrath of my parents. As I made my way back, it was getting more dark than it normally does. Storm, maybe. I had no light source, and as night hit hard, the woods looked different, of course. But I suddenly felt like I didn't know the landmarks that normally guided me home. As I stood there, I realized there was no noise, no wind, no insects, no animals. I had never experienced that before. I knew my directions at least, and kept heading in the same direction, and I finally hit the tracks. Pitch black and dead silent, I was unnerved in an extreme way. About halfway down the tracks towards the road, I heard a growl and something massive moving in the bushline. Fear lent me wings as I ran harder than I thought possible. The world was a blur of horror as the rustling seemed to follow behind me all the way to the road. I sprinted the rest of the way home. I walked in, not caring about what punishment awaited me. My parents were stern, but when they saw me, white as a ghost and shaking and out of breath, even they softened. I have no idea what was out there that night. Bonus file written by DL33T3D, the demon that killed physics. I didn't believe in ghosts, demons, or anything before this. I am a very scientific and logic-based person, yet this scared the crap out of me. My fiancé and I had rented a house together. There were Tibetan prayer flags hanging outside. Everything was cool for about a month until we cut them down. The first instance was not anything crazy. She, a devout Catholic, had hung a crucifix on her bedroom door. Nothing weird ever happened in that bedroom. We would wake up in the morning and find small figurines on the shelf turned backwards, and one day found them broken. It was only weird. Around Christmas, she traveled back east, and I was at the house by myself. There was a halfway connecting the two bedrooms with a bathroom in the middle. Opposite the bathroom door was the entry to the living room, and to the spare bedroom side was the kitchen. I was in the spare bedroom, my office, playing games until I got tired. All the lights in the house were off, and when I walked out of the room into the hallway, after one step, I heard a menacing growl and felt breath on the back of my neck. I spun 180, flung my arm into the bathroom, and turned the light on. Whatever it was gone. As a few months went by, the entity would become more menacing, banging on the door to our room, breaking every Mary statue in the house, and moving things in the kitchen. We told our friends the weird things that were happening, and they hooked us up with someone that claimed they could exorcise whatever it was. At this point, I am skeptical, but I humor them. She shows up and walks in the house, turns around and walks out. She didn't say anything to us as she walked to her car. "Hey, what the hell?" She replied, "I can't help you. Leave that house be." The last night there, I heard voices in the kitchen and what sounded like the door opening to the side of the house. I grabbed my gun thinking someone was breaking in. We lived in a pretty bad neighborhood for the cheaper rent. I walked down the hallway and saw a light, on and off, and what sounded like things were getting moved, pots and pans banging, cabinet doors, etc. I hopped in front of the entry to the kitchen and pointed my gun, yelling to get out of my house. What I saw I will never forget. The cabinets were opening and slamming, chairs moving, and the refrigerator opening and closing, the source of the intermittent light. There was nothing in the kitchen. I ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door, locking it. As I did, a large bang and the door physically moved inward. When we woke up in the morning, the house was in disarray. We packed what we could and left immediately, never going back. Case notes for file 1246. Chased by an unseen nightmare in a fjord of Norway. So it's not at all surprising you had an unsettling, soiling incident, given the unfathomable fear and burst of adrenaline that went through your system. No shame in that. Would happen to anyone in that situation. Hell, I doubt most would have escaped with their life. Even your dog lived through it. Very happy to hear that. I wonder sometimes, when we're all out there alone in the gargantuan wilderness of the world, and a parallel vision is triggered where we see and experience another reality entirely, maybe when so isolated, we can connect to other universes where there are very different beasts lurking around. More so than in the adjacent universes, which would be extremely similar to our own. There wouldn't really be any different beasts. But if you go to a universe really far out, there could be very odd beasts indeed. Could even explain Bigfoot sightings. Maybe people are seeing all manner of creatures out there that may even be labeled supernatural relative to what we're used to, but they're just normal over there, in those universes. It may explain how you got away too. The beast wasn't truly able to interact with you. The stone mist never actually hit you. So in a sense, even the rock falling was sort of an illusion. Not an illusion, it really happened, but in a different universe. You saw it and felt it, but it wasn't where your body actually was, it was just your soul. And your soul kind of went for a horror joyride. Your dog too. And now time for the quote of the day. Love is an irresistible desire to be irresistibly desired. Robert Frost. I do love this quote. And it speaks to a few things. The first thing that you have to think about is, it's okay to want to be loved. Everyone has that desire. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, we want to find someone that finds us to be irresistible and to be with us and want to spend their life with you and make a family and all that. On the other side is, if you want that, you have to consider, how do you make yourself irresistible to someone else? You're never going to be irresistible to everyone. That's impossible. But if you want to be loved, you need to be worthy of love. And not worthy in like this cosmic moral sense, but just in the sense of pragmatism. What do people want? You know, if you're a guy, you want to be someone that is dependable, reliable, intelligent, mature, resourceful, someone who has accomplished stuff in life and enjoys having fun and doing adventurous things. I think most women would want that. And if you're a woman, similar traits, but also being kind, sweet. I think just being kind and sweet is the most amazing thing ever. Especially these days where so many people are bitter and unpleasant. No one wants to be around that. Embrace the fact that you want to be desired, but also work to be worthy of that desire. Case notes for file 1247. The 5-hour drive to nowhere. Aliens might have been involved here. It has all the classics of an abduction. Late at night, isolated area, dark. If so, the memory fabrication was more pristine than most in this case, as you don't even recall seeing any bright lights or anything buzzing around in your car's electronics, which typically precedes an abduction. Their technology disrupts ours, the flow of electrons. For some reason, that isn't what I suspect though. It sounds more to me like a temporary dead buffered server, those we visit while in transit from quantum immortality to a new server. You're in a dead zone effectively, a server or world that is uninhabited. Nothing going on, and time there isn't relevant. You just get reset when you move to a new universe, the one where you're actually going to spend your time, the permanent location. In a sense, you were just in a base template until your soul finishes downloading into the new server. I can't discount aliens. I always wanted to be aliens, but I think in this case it's just a server transfer effect. I don't know what caused it, why you just died in the car, but people do die randomly all the time. You know, it's something you always have to remember. That does happen, sadly. Case notes, file 1248. The remarkable journey of Hudson, the best dog in the multiverse. I love that line. We owe it to pets we keep to make their lives as comfortable and fun as possible. It's the least we can do for their devotion, don't you think? This means lots of treats. And lots of walks. It's interesting how your dream did predict the future though, but not in every little detail of minutia. Those fragments of information the subconscious can grab onto that speak of the future don't always tell the whole story. You can grab certain fragments, maybe the big picture, but not all the details all the time. most of the time I suspect it's no more discernible than as a strong emotion or gut feeling. And I think in those cases, mostly people ignore them or they don't believe they're true. I think over time, if you allow yourself to believe it and recognize those gut emotions, and then you realize, yeah, this stuff is actually happening, you'll embrace it more. But I think people are afraid of that. And I get it, the idea of predicting the future or even like feeling the future is still somewhat disconcerting. I understand that. Okay, so notes for the bonus file. The Unsettling Californian Giant. I've been rewatching Game of Thrones the past 2 weeks, and this makes me think of what if the mountain came out as a manifested spirit? It would be unstoppable. I'd take him even over dragons. Now, the size you described him as is certainly huge, but there are a lot of human beings of that size. The supernatural element is in his teleportation ability, seemingly. Unless he somehow had a dirt bike hidden in the sand, and this was a kind of twisted, elaborate prank. Even that doesn't seem right though, as you'd have heard the bike rev up and the motor if he actually managed to beat you to it, and then as you mentioned, how would he even know what path you took if there's hundreds going into town? Has to be a spirit, doesn't it? A really odd giant spirit. There's one other thing. In these cases of duplication events or possible duplication, another possibility is a real prank where I've seen a few reels on Instagram and so on of people, you have twins or triplets that pretend to walk past someone multiple times. And it's a cool prank because it's physical matter. They're actually just twins or triplets. One where they were going through a drive-thru and asking for the same thing, dressed in the same thing. Of course, it's one car after the other. So to the employee's perspective, there's no sense of this, and triplets and all that are rare enough, especially if they're dressed the same way. Could this be some weird prank? Maybe it's on YouTube somewhere of someone that just hides out in the desert and lures people in with the coal fire because it's flat, right? So you can see everything for miles and miles. I could see that as a possibility. But maybe it's more likely that it's just a weird spirit. I don't know. And now time for the quote of the day. Life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's all over much too soon. Woody Allen. Kind of like the appeal I have with coffee, which I just take it black. But it's bitter, it's kind of gross, but it's delicious and awesome. It's weird, isn't it? Or spicy food. There's tons of pain, but I love it. Sometimes I feel like Hellraiser or Pinhead, will show you so many delights, pain and pleasure. You don't want too much pain, but there's some aspect of life where resistance and maybe suffering is going too far, loneliness and all that, but without the negative, it's hard to appreciate the positive. There's a lot of, yin and yang, Chinese philosophy in that sense, and it's true. Everything is relative to something else. So if life is only good, well, you'll just be at a neutral baseline. You'll never have those highs. Yeah, you need the lows to have them, but that's okay. I think life is pretty amazing as it is. Still, strive to make it better, but enjoy what you have. And yes, it's over way too soon. Let's try to fix that. Case notes file 1249. My daughter's time-defying double. I think either parallel viewing or spirit travel can fit well in this instance. Or it could be a time pocket distortion. But those are very rare, especially within a home, because they tend to move around, those distorted pockets of space-time. So either your mind was connected into an alternate universe where the key difference being your daughter was playing in the backyard instead of doing laundry downstairs, as you asked her. So in that other universe, maybe you didn't ask her, so she was just outside. And that's what you were seeing, temporarily, for like a minute or two. Or your daughter projected her soul outward into the backyard to play, but the latter strikes me as less likely, just from how rare it is to soul project while conscious. It almost always happens when sleeping, unless the individual is actively trying to accomplish it, in some sort of test or environment where they're trying to do it. It's so rare people don't realize it's happening. And most don't realize you can do it. And even with a lot of focus, it can take decades of practice. So it's unlikely your daughter would be doing that. Very unlikely. Probably just parallel viewing. Which probably happens all the time. We just don't notice it because the universes are similar enough where there's no real difference. Hell, it could be happening to me right now, but I'm just alone in my room, so I would never know. Nothing would be different. Case notes for the bonus file. Shadows and UFOs of the past. This made me wonder if aliens are around. Are they more capable of tracking and detecting spiritual energy? If I'm right and a ghost is the remnant energy of the individual soul rippling behind, then there would be some way to detect it. Perhaps through a mechanism that can reach to a higher dimensional layer where the energy is located. So maybe aliens have this kind of technology. So they gravitate towards locations where spirits are pronounced. I might be way off base on this one, but it's an interesting idea. And maybe it explains why they're attracted to certain people as well. Maybe those people are genetically more able to attune to that other dimension. So maybe they use that for their technology. Okay, so that's for the bonus file. The Dark Secrets of the Mustang Pen. So I thank you for saving this poor Mustang's life. It's easy to just think that the beast is wild and can't be tamed, so let's just end her. Get it over with. A sad way to think, in my opinion. Even if it ended poorly for her in the end, that you were willing to try to help means the world. I don't know if the shape of those massacre sites forming a triangle actually matters. You have the Bermuda Triangle and the Texas Triangle and stuff like that, so maybe a geometric shape does amplify certain energies. I'm not sure about that. It's like amplifying the signal some way. But I do think that concentrated negative energy can leave marks on certain locations. They linger behind. And for whatever reason, most animals are highly attuned to sensing this kind of energy. So they always react before humans do, and more potently so, as you described. My guess is if you were to live in that same pen area, it would still affect you too, maybe just slower to affect humans. And now time for the quote of the day. The real art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. Dorothy Neville. So this kind of ties into tact and having sense of... I'm maybe not the best at this. I tend to speak my mind sometimes where to the detriment of even my own point or, just normal conversation. I don't have time to edit and adjust what I want to say. So in real-time conversation, sometimes just take a pause, take a breather. It's okay to have silence. Just think about what you want to say. There's no need to rush it. None at all. Have tact, have composure, have integrity. Think about what you want to say. And is it going to bring across your point? Or is it going to make someone feel terrible? Maybe there's a way to say it in a way that doesn't make them feel terrible or gets your point across better. I think often the Socratic method is really good for that. Just asking people questions about certain things they believe that can lead down their own road. It's like helping someone get to the same place through their own feet. Because if you bring them along, sometimes they can feel pulled and people resist that. Be cautious about what you say and when you say it. And maybe sometimes it's better to say nothing at all. Case notes are file 1250. How a blister saved my life. Yes, so the pains of new shoes and figuring out the ideal tightness of the shoestrings to avoid those blister issues, you have to break the shoes in. I know that. I walk so much I have to change shoes often. Rare, of course, that this generates some sort of life-saving event, though. Is this just a coincidence? In this case, I'm half and half. It certainly could be a coincidence, but the odds do not scream that, do they? To truly know, you'd have to delve into the reasoning you purchased the new shoes exactly when you did. Was it impromptu? If it was a spurious purchase, then perhaps your guardian angel influenced you to decide that now was the time for a new pair of kicks, and they ended up saving your life. Or it's just a coincidence. Hard to say for sure, but it's pretty rare. Case notes of file 1251. My father's final gift. I'm so terribly sorry for your loss. Even if a bit of time has passed, it's never easy. I think about this too nowadays. My mom is in her 50s and still very healthy, but my dad is pushing into his 60s, and while still healthy, he spends his entire summers camping and fishing. It still makes me worry, A takeaway from this story is how your father seemed to know your words were true. He gave you the letter, not at all at random, and when you suggested to be the last time you see him, he hugged you tighter, didn't try to deny it. Our minds are well attuned to what's going on inside our bodies. We can feel it when death approaches for us from some underlying illness that's not, maybe there's not physical symptoms, but your mind still knows something isn't right. Maybe we can't know to the minute, but that general miasma of dread is there. It's a real medical term, especially in those final moments, fear of impending dread. But in your father's case, I don't think that overwhelming fear ever hit him. It sounds like he passed away in the night while sleeping. If there's any silver lining to it, it's that. And also having the ethereal connection to loved ones confirmed for you. You just knew what happened after it happened, without any direct way to know, but you did know. Your father was with you, and in many ways, still is. Case notes of file 1252. The Time Traveler in a 1940s suit. Your friends saw you talking to this man too, which means we can automatically rule out hallucination. I don't buy into collective delusions unless they're induced by some kind of willed entity or maybe a memory manipulation. An actual time traveler? Well, if so, clearly not through advanced future technology. You don't get that advanced, then pretend to be homeless in a suit from an era that doesn't even match the era you're in. That doesn't make sense. From this man's perspective, how everyone else was dressed would appear mismatched, foreign even. But then if you're truly homeless, it wouldn't be the first thing out of your mouth, would it be? Because if this really is time traveling, he wouldn't be aware of it. It wasn't by his will that he was in that era. Another possibility is a type of test. I'm reminded of the Lady of the Lake in the Excalibur mythos. Plenty of interpretations and speculations surrounding this, but in essence, a figure appears to test the worthiness of a particular individual. To obtain a sword in that classic story, or if employed in our reality, perhaps to determine the worth of an event that would later happen to you. Are you worthy of it? How would you deal with it? Perhaps to make it clear to others and yourself that you're a good man with a good heart. Not everyone, in fact these days I'd argue most, would have helped the man, given him money. Or it doesn't have to be money too, you could have offered him food or something, that's perfectly reasonable. But I think most people just ignore homeless people now. Yeah, there's some people who scam, they pretend to be homeless and make a bunch of money. I guess that still speaks that there are some good people willing to help though. And yes, there are some scams. If you give money to a homeless person, they may just use it for not good things, but they may be down on their luck and you don't know. So even if sometimes you give money to a scammer, you also sometimes, maybe most of the time, give money to people who really need it. And now time for the lore of the day. The Lady of the Lake is a name or a title used by several either fairy or fairy-like but human enchantresses in the matter of Britain, the body of medieval literature and mythology associated with the legend of King Arthur. She plays several important roles in many stories, including providing Arthur with the sword Excalibur, eliminating Merlin, raising Lancelot after the death of his father, and helping to take the dying Arthur to Avalon. Different sources known as the Lady of the Lake appear concurrently as separate characters in some versions of the legend, since at least the post-Vulgate cycle, and consequently the seminal Le Morte d'Arthur, with the latter describing them as a hierarchical group, while some texts also give this title to either Morgan or her sister. So I think in general this means that the Lady of the Lake is not one particular person. It may be one entity that appears in different ways. This is just a mythos, but it could be there's probably some basis on reality to it. So it is interesting to consider, because there's a lot of entities that can make themselves appear to change form or be in different places at the same time. Question to file 1253. My mind was mystified on the beach. This reminds me of the ring story from a while ago. A husband was in the deep ocean swimming, I think as part of a cruise expedition if I recall. His wedding ring slipped off his finger, sinking deep into the ocean. Without scuba gear it'd be impossible to retrieve it. Then back home, months or years later, the ring was on the bathroom sink. Mind-blowing. Now tell me, with events like that happening, is there any doubt that there are forces involved that try to help us? I don't think this is some accidental glitch in the sense that the universe just despawned the ring and then put it back exactly there randomly. No. They can't fix all our lives or go to work for us if it's angels or something, but I think some people at least do have some guardian angels looking out for them. Now, if this is angels from God or employees in the server room where we're jacked into the simulation from, who can say? I can't. All I can say is, we aren't as alone as it may appear, and there's probably someone watching out for you, in some way. Doesn't mean all your problems are going to be solved by them, but in certain circumstances, you may receive help. Very comforting. Case notes for the creepy file number 110. The spine-chilling silence of the deep woods. So I could see this being a mountain lion or other beast. It would explain the silence, as prey animals clear out fast in the presence of danger. No insects though, that part is odd, and no wind too. Could be another layer of coincidence, just wind drops down as the night falls. All that said, I do believe there are times when we're alone, far away from others, that the fundamental server infrastructure has less processing capacity allocated to that particular area. This can lead to anomalies and glitches. Could lend towards the lack of noise too. And I mean, we do see this is a technique used right now in MMORPGs where, given a certain area, there's grids or server clusters, and if a lot of people are in one, then there's more server capacity allocated to that area to process it. If you're just one person alone in a faraway system, there's very little processing power needed. Well, supposedly needed. Sometimes it could lead to issues where there's just not enough, where there's some other action that was needed, and for you it looks like a glitch, like in this case. Also, the wrath of your parents. That's a funny way to put it. My parents were strict too in terms of getting back home too late when I was growing up, but they were understanding. I never had any horror situations as this one, but growing up I did have a lot of situations where I hurt myself. Falling from trees, bruises, a few broken bones, jumping across ravines, tick bites, poison ivy. Oh man, somehow I got poison ivy every other month. Part of childhood exploration I do not miss. Okay, so that's for the bonus file. The demon that killed physics. Finally, a logical choice. If I ever encounter anything remotely close to a whole kitchen spazzing out like that, cabinets and the like, refrigerator door opening and closing, I am never going back to that place. I wouldn't even have spent the night. I would just have booked it, run out naked in the street if I need to. No. It's like those memes of insects invading a home, like there's spiders in a corner or something. You burn it with fire. And hell, maybe even that has an impact on whatever spirits are bound to that place. Fire is cleansing. And then you had that girl your friends recommended, some sort of priest maybe? I don't know if she was charging money, but even so, the fact that she wouldn't or couldn't cleanse whatever was there is one of the scariest lines I've ever read. If it is a scam, well, they wouldn't pretend they couldn't do it, because then they make no money. If they really believe that they can, and then they go to a place that's so evil that they don't even want to try, leave the home, there's nothing I can do. Either way, that's terrifying. I do wonder if demons in the biblical sense exist, or if it's only angry spirits bound to a location. If the former, where do demons come from? Is it a mythos similar to Supernatural, where demons are spirits sent to hell, and then twisted by unfathomable torture over eons, and as such turned into demons? True evil that was inflicted on them over centuries or millennia. I really don't know. I suppose it doesn't matter much to us. What we do know is there are entities fueled by anger that can bind to areas, and if they want out, best to oblige them. Get out. And now time for the quote of the day. The heights by great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upward in the night. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So what does this signify? It means that those who achieve greatness, they don't necessarily have the most talent or they're not the smartest people, they're simply the most determined. They're the people who will toil away at night when other people are sleeping and get more work done, grind out themselves more. And there's a point where it goes to an extreme, where you have this self-help culture now where tons of funny memes about it, where unless you're up at like 1 a.m. and you've bought Twitter by 5 a.m. and you've run a marathon by 9 a.m., that kind of stuff, or it's taken to an extreme. I think the core points are good, where, not just to earn money, but just to achieve in life. But there's always that middle ground. Put in effort in something that matters to you, and you'll be amazed at where you get. Especially if you compare yourself to most people who just put in enough to get by, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's about asking yourself what you want from life. How much do you want? Do you want to reach the height of Mount Everest? Well, that's going to require more work and more dedication. If you're comfortable where you are with this more simple life, again, nothing wrong with that. That's great. Just know yourself. Really, that's the key. Know yourself and then determine how much you want and then go from there. And just realize, reality, objective reality. If you want a lot more, you're going to have to work harder. And that's okay. So know yourself first. Then you can go from there. I know for myself, I don't need much. I don't need to toil away all the time, because all I want is a simple piece of land and a dog and a great view and good food and a cozy cabin with a crackling fire in winter and, coffee and hot chocolate. Like the video, subscribe, hit the bell. Kinetic Symphony signing off.